This podcast is a member of the Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network. Visit voicesofwrestling.com to hear the rest of our great podcasts, as well as show reviews, columns, opinions, and updates across the world of wrestling.
Hi, I'm Case Lowe, co-host of the Open the Voice Gate podcast. The one question I'm constantly asked when it comes to Dragon Gate is, how do I get into the promotion? Well, stop asking and start listening to the Open the Voice Gate podcast, released every Wednesday on the Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network. For exclusive news and show reviews, look no further than the leader in Dragon Gate coverage, Open the Voice Gate.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Ballot, a podcast where the conversation begins. I am your host, Ryan Knightsey, and today I guess in a way we're going to talk about two things, but more importantly, today's main topic is we're going to fly all the way over to, I guess, Europe, well, kind of Europe, and then back to America. We're going to be talking about Gunther, Walter, however which way you're going to pronounce his name or say his name. We're going to be talking about Gunther, who is a candidate this year, first-time candidate on the ballot, of course, in the modern U.S. and Canada section. And today, joining us on the ballot is none other than John Pollock from Post Wrestling. John, I am very excited to have you on. As you know, probably I've wanted you on for a little bit long of a time, but I'm glad we figured it out. I'm glad we worked it out. I'm very happy to have you on the show.
Ryan, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to this discussion and some of the candidates we're going to be talking about, mainly Gunther as well. Maybe the second most controversial Big Daddy contestant on the ballot this year. But it's great to be here. I think in the history of working in professional wrestling, I have never been booked for an interview so far in advance as you did. I think that we agreed to this back in January, and That's it is correct. Now the middle of May. So I like that. You reached out, and I committed months in advance, and here we are to break down the case of one Walter Hahn.
Look, I like booking guests in advance. I like getting people on the books. I actually have, as we're recording, I have the next 3 guests already booked and lined up, and I think 2 of the 3 are already scheduled. Look, I like to do that. I have to put my film producing degree to work, and that's requires booking, I guess. So I emailed you back in January, and I think it actually worked out a little bit better to do this in May because it allows us to do it after WrestleMania. And I think it just also works. It makes a little bit more sense discussing his case.
Yeah, because we had this discussion back and forth about, this is coming right after the Cena retirement. And it was sort of like one of the big talking points was, okay, you went with Gunther here. What's the follow-up going to be? And I think both of us agreed, like, let's give this a couple of months and we'll see kind of where Gunther settles. And here we are like 6 months after what's probably going to be one of the more famous matches that Gunther has been a part of, and where he sort of lands now that he's in a Hall of Fame-like discussion.
Plus, since that time, added another scalp to the old belt there with AJ Styles, and probably based on rumors, I imagine he was going to add one in Mania, but who knows? But either way, we've got a lot to discuss when it comes to Gunther. Obviously, first time being on the ballot. I think he's an interesting case. But before we really get to him, and for the remainder of the show, I do want to do up top here. Last year was the passing of Sabu, and we I put together sort of a sort of tribute episode to a degree, but also I know at the time that Dave said that, he's going to put Sabu back on the ballot, and obviously Sabu went back on the ballot and went in not almost immediately, which was outstanding. And I didn't have the in my busy schedule for this month, didn't have the time to put together another tribute episode, but I thought I wanted to start this off with a discussion because he's been on the ballot for the past several years. I don't remember how many years off the top of my head, but he's been on the ballot for the past couple of years, and his passing on May 6th, I felt it would be important to discuss Ted Turner, a man that obviously has a large impression that he left on the wrestling landscape, but also a massive footprint when it comes to global national news, national broadcasting, sports with the Braves. I currently live in Atlanta, so he has done I haven't lived in Atlanta my entire life, but he's been doing great things for Atlanta since like the 70s. So he is a massive footprint. We have pictures of him in our airport, massive imprint when it comes to Ted Turner and this city alone. And John, it does work out sadly well with someone who covers wrestling media to such a degree. I want to open up that conversation first to you, John, is, thoughts on Ted Turner, as from a not necessarily a Hall of Fame level yet, but just the sort of the general thoughts on Ted Turner's impact on professional wrestling.
Yeah. First of all, I wasn't aware of the of how strong his case is of passing the airport test that you have now introduced with Ted Turner being memorialized. I'm sure you have like a really unique perspective, just the amount of coverage I'm sure you've seen locally over the past couple of weeks. Ted Turner's always been a really fascinating candidate to me on the ballot. And like, I think there's the camps of how can you not have Ted Turner in versus how much was his day-to-day wrestling contributions. They were probably minimal, but you take a step back, like his decisions it's a very different industry without a Ted Turner. And I think it opens the door, Ryan, of candidates that we're going to have to assess in the years to come. And that's more so in the executive boardroom level that are making such big decisions. Like there will come a time that a Nick Khan has to be determined. There is a really interesting argument for like a Bonnie Hammer, who just did not have the public profile of a Ted Turner, but was a lifesaver for the WWE when they lost Spike TV and got back with the USA Network. Ted Turner is one of the most famous media moguls, and while wrestling is going to be well down the list of accomplishments, it doesn't diminish at all like where Georgia Championship Wrestling became such a force once it got cable, once the advent of cable in 1976, and just the proliferation of national wrestling and getting WCW in 1988 when it did. Like there are all these decisions that you take Ted Turner out of. It's such a wildly different industry, and I had never voted for Ted Turner up until last year, and I did end up voting for him last year, but I'd be lying if I said it was like just this automatic decision for me. Like I've weighed the positives and negatives, and I can be open to both of them. Given how close he was last year, would be stunned if he does not get in this year because of that.
Yeah, I'm pulling up what his numbers were last year. He was second in non-wrestlers here. He got 55.5%. Obviously, the threshold being 60. So I don't know. Like he's one of those any year now at this point sort of candidates. Because I don't believe we're adding anyone. No, non-wrestlers not adding anyone unless another passing or something like that. So I think there's, in all likelihood, I also agree that I could see him getting in this year, especially with the sort of the colloquial death bump, as it were. But yeah, it just a massive. It's crazy. Like he has such a massive imprint on professional wrestling, but when you talk about Ted Turner and his legacy, wrestling is like almost a footnote to everything he's done. Because if I recall correctly, the Call Me Ted documentary that HBO put together a couple years ago, if I recall correctly, I don't think it discussed wrestling in that documentary series.
It didn't discuss it. There's like maybe 30 seconds of B-roll, and it's like Christian Amanpour discussing how they would be doing the news and they would hear the wrestling being done in the studio. Like it was
a thing in the background, literally.
Like it was not a part of the Ted Turner story. Like if you've read biographies on him, like it comes up, like it's very, very little. And I think that's what you look at it. Like if we are to say, hey, without Ted Turner, there would not have been a WCW post 1988. It might have gone out of business in the 90s. That's totally fair. But I don't think we're going to have that argument for like the Carter family keeping TNA in business and the big boom period of WCW. I think you want to assign that credit to the day-to-day people that were getting WCW up to that 96 through 99 business levels. And that was not Ted. Ted funded this. Ted allowed it to continue. But I don't know if that alone is going to be enough for some people. Like I think you're of two sides of it, of how you approach Ted Turner. But certainly it's one of those candidates where it's like the idea of Ted Turner not involved in professional wrestling you can't deny the influence aspect of what his decisions, as far removed as they may be to day-to-day work, had enormous imprints, of course.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's this sort of idea, because I was when I heard about his passing, I was sort of reflecting on it a lot, and I kept going back to this idea of hear me out here, John. I kept going back to this idea of like art and artistry, and like I went back to, like, I forgot the proper word, but like the Renaissance era, where you would have an artist, but you would also need a financier for that artist, for that art to exist. And whether or not we have discussions about wrestling being art is one thing, or capitalism, or all these other aspects to it. But this idea that, like, someone had to foot the bill, right? And we see that with, like, AEW nowadays. It's Tony Khan and is footing the bill, and obviously Turner is footing a large part of that bill as well. But someone had to, like, foot the bill for that to exist. I mean, look at, like, how the territory system kind of worked. That, like, someone had to foot the bill. Vince McMahon lucked out that having a territory in New York gave him the largest income pretty much out of any sort of territory. So he was able to foot that bill immensely. Someone ultimately had to do that. And obviously when the 90s or late 80s going into 90s, things becoming more properties and going on to super stations and all that jazz, someone was going to provide the funding for all these sorts of things to happen. If he wasn't the person, would someone else have? Who the heck knows? It's a massive what if, but it's a thing of, like, would WCW have gone under at that point, or NWA, WCW have gone under at that point? Would WWE, WWF have had their monopoly, a decade and a half, a little bit earlier, and what that could have had on a lasting imprint? Obviously, these are all big what ifs, but I go back to this idea of he being one of the obviously a massive financier to professional wrestling.
Yeah, and in some cases of, like, what would have become of the WWF in the 90s without a Ted Turner involvement? That's a bigger what if. WCW going out of business, I don't think that's a wild what if. I think that, like, they're granted, maybe somebody else could have taken the remnants of WCW and it existed, but not at the level it would have. If a Jerry Jarrett acquired the remnants of it, there's no way this thing is getting television on TBS or getting a Monday night slot on TNT. It would just, at best, be a very different and probably reduced WCW. So you are operating with that. And the analogy is a sound one. Like, this is, like, how much do you assign, like, the ownership structure of a sports team that goes and wins the World Series? Like, we're not necessarily inducting owners into the Hall of Fame unless they are, like, their influence on baseball or whatever sport of choice is so undeniable that this is different. And that's kind of what the crux of the Ted Turner argument is. But it is certainly a case that you just go back, and it's not just confined to WCW, but when you look at Georgia Championship Wrestling, the Atlanta War of 72, the fact that he actually was getting, like, Philadelphia wrestling from Vince Sr. onto his networks at the very onset of when he's, like, financing and operating in debt for a lot of these in the early days. Like, wrestling was a constant for this guy. And as, like, Dave has reported, as late as, like, 2004, he's looking at the idea, like, could we get something going? He had an immense loyalty to professional wrestling, and there were many successes under him. How much of those successes are attributed to him beyond being the guy that it pretty much gave them the playing field to operate under? And there's probably a role for that. And going back to my other point, I think these are arguments that are going to come up. It sort of surfaced when Stephanie McMahon was a candidate, but I think it's going to be more prevalent when we're talking about, like, as this has become very much this B2B business that TKO is, and to an extent AEW too, like, these high executives like Kevin Riley signing off on AEW, getting into the WBD family, huge game-changing decision. But I don't think any of us are going to be, I don't know, Ryan, if you'll be doing a show on Kevin Riley in the coming years, but,
What if I am your guest? Your guest on the Kevin Rally episode?
You know what? I will be free May of 2032, and we will do the redo here. But I think these are good arguments and discussions to have, and Ted Turner is a perfect kicking off point because like Nick Khan is going to be like that's a really fascinating case. This guy has completely transformed WWE in the 6 years that he has been its company president and what he has overseen, the deals he has completed, and has just signed a new deal. Like he's going to have at least a decade here. And like, can you argue that there has been, like Vince McMahon included, of this 2020 to 2030 period, who has had more of an impact on WWE and its trajectory than Nick Khan? So I think a lot of this will apply different people in Nick Khan and Ted Turner, but some of the principal arguments are going to overlap.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I think that it is because and it's with Nick Khan especially, and obviously we're going a little bit away from Ted here. My screen just went weird all of a sudden. Sorry about that. With Nick Khan, what's interesting about him is that it's not just about changing the business for WWE, but it's sort of capitalizing on the television business changing and going and heading into that direction of business of money flooding into TV in terms of sports. That it's sort of by doing so, it also gave way to an argument for Tony Khan to be like, there's a lot of money in sports, there's a lot of money in wrestling. There's an argument for me to be doing that. There's this idea that he changed the professional wrestling business model to become TV forward, whereas it obviously previously was more pay-per-view forward. And that's where finances coming in. And that's, that long term, we'll see all the effects of that and whether or not how this bubble works out. But it's a fascinating discussion that I think I fully agree that like it is a conversation point that we'll have in probably a decade, but I think it's going to be an important one. And I think it starts exactly here with Ted Turner because it's a guy that, how you change the business and how you finance the business is incredibly important. Go when we said if someone else came, if it went to like Jerry Jarrett, look, it might have looked like TNA for all we know. But it didn't look like TNA. It looked like WCW. It had that financial backing. That's to me, that maybe that's the Ted Turner difference. I don't know, but that I guess that's part of the argument here.
Yeah, and those are kind of the comps that come to mind for me is the fact that undeniably, like the Carter family financing TNA for the years it did, it gave a lot of people jobs in wrestling for a long period of time, but. I mean, there are a few success years under that period. Like certainly when they got to Spike, that was a high point. But like the Carter family is not going to be anyone's argument. Like even on a smaller scale, like Kerry Silkin financed Ring of Honor and lost money every single year before selling to Sinclair. Now you take a Kerry Silkin out of there, not only is Ring of Honor gone, but the performers that would become big stars in the industry. I'm sure a good percentage of those probably get out of wrestling ultimately. Like this is not a WWE that has the aperture for that wide array of talent, and what Ring of Honor produced, it generated money. It generated money for non-Ring of Honor promotions. But Kerry Silkin footed the bill and lost money on it, but that was a huge contribution at a kind of a low point for U.S. wrestling, and it did usher in a different style, and the influence of that era of Ring of Honor, it would be felt for the next decade.
I was just about to say it was also a great breeding ground for wrestlers to get that sort of development and being I was probably at that point in time at the forefront. It was like that and like PWG as well, sort of the forefront of developing that what is today like the modern U.S. style. The high work rate, the sort of the influence from both Mexico and Japan, the Lucha Risu sort of influence into modern U.S. wrestling stars. It's all not started in Ring of Honor, obviously, but it's sort of bred there at the very least.
Yeah, I think it really ushered in, eyes on different forms of professional wrestling, different stars that could get over, and many of whom, when given the opportunity with national promotions, came out and they were very successful. And I think that foundation was very key. And you take someone like a Kerry Silkin out, I think the 2010s up until the present are probably a lot different if Ring of Honor disappears in the mid 2000s, because from a business perspective, Ring of Honor did not make sense for Kerry Silkin, but it was a passion play.
Yeah, and going back to Ted, same sort of thing. There's an argument that it didn't make sense. I mean, many arguments that Ted probably had in the boardroom that this doesn't make sense as a financial play. But it's, hey, this is the station. This is TBS. Wrestling belongs here. This is where I want it to be, and moving forward with that. And that lasted as long as Ted had a voice in the room.
When we are inundated so much with like what is the formula of TKO, like it's very clear. Like this is. We are a business that how do we go up and to the right every single quarter? And the idea of Ted Turner in the mid 90s, like think of 1993 going against your board and arguing in favor of this WCW asset that is drawing 600 people at shows by the end of 93. Like it's almost an impossible argument beyond I get the say so here and I can keep it here. But like that is not a winning argument. But Ted Turner had the pull to be able to allow that, and WCW would have its glory period later in the decade. But in the early 90s, like this is pretty much just, hey, this is my sandbox, and I'm keeping the decrepit toy in the corner there. Sorry to WCW of 1993, not to call it a decrepit toy. There was some great stuff in 1993, but that decrepit toy was not drawing many people.
No, I understand it. I understand the metaphor there. Ted Turner, a massive influence when it comes to the finances of professional wrestling. I'm very, I think we're both in agreement that he's probably someone that we'll get in. You said that you didn't used to vote for him, but now you voted last year.
Yes.
I assuming, do you know off the top of your head if you're going to vote for him again this year?
I most likely will. Like usually when someone's on the ballot for me and I vote for them, I'm not taking that vote away. Like once they cross that threshold for me. So I imagine voting for him again this year. And I think he's going to get a lot of strong support. Like it would be stunning if he did not get in this year.
I fully agree. I'm fully expecting Ted to get in this year into the Hall of Fame. So look, what that does then is then it opens up the conversations to other people, like you said, like the Nick Khans of the world, which will probably be way later in the next decade or so. But we'll certainly talk about it when it comes up. So let's if we don't have anything more to say to talk about Ted Turner, I think we move into Gunther because that's the main crux of the episode. So Gunther, Walter. This is his first time on the ballot. If you're new to this show, the premise of the show basically is that we're talking about people that are joining the Hall of Fame ballot for the first time, a candidate for the very first time ever, and discussing where they sort of currently sit at the time of recording in the Hall of Fame criteria. If you don't know the criteria is basically, look, you need to get knocking off 2 out of 3 categories of ability, drawing power, and historical significance in a positive manner. Those are the sort of criterias that Dave Meltzer has laid out in the Wrestling Observer newsletter for this Hall of Fame. Obviously, you can be so overwhelming and 1 or 2 that it deserves introduction, but ultimately you are looking to, he's putting up people that have something, and then it becomes a discussion for the rest of the voting body to try to see, hey, or at least 60% of a voting body to say whether or not this guy is a Hall of Famer. So let's talk about Gunther. He is somebody that is going to be joining us in the modern US and Canada section. Obviously, he started out in Europe, wrestling in Europe, wrestling on the indie scene there, bounced around in Japan as well during his come up, and obviously has found his way over to WWE. I think it was like 2018, 2019, then into the pandemic in NXT UK, bounced over to America in NXT, and then now on the main roster for WWE. John, that's a very brief overview, but I want to hear my question that I give everyone on the podcast. If any, what are your sort of connections to Gunther, to Walter? What are your thoughts regarding, what are your connections to him as a wrestler?
Well, I was trying to rack my brain of when I would have first seen him, and I'm imagining it was through the much maligned Flow Wrestling streaming app, where they had deals with Evolve and aired a lot of the WWN content, and I was always just fascinated by someone that was very much against the body type of to me, it was like a real enhancement that here's a guy that can come in, work the style that he does, which when you break it down, it's by design, like a very basic structure, but done for ultimate drama, ultimate effectiveness. And I think that he was just such a, like, the man always commanded to me like a really strong presence, and getting to see him live, it was SummerSlam weekend in 2019 when it was done here in Toronto. And they tried to do kind of this sort of miniature Mania weekend where a bunch of indies came over here, and that included WXW. And getting to see him live against Daisuke Sekimoto, seeing him live in person, I mean, that really left an imprint on me of this guy. He had already started with NXT UK at the moment, but still was doing his obligations with WXW, could still do independence. And it was kind of this nice balancing act that he was able to maintain that few had for WWE. So, I mean, that was probably like the early formation. And then seeing a lot of his work, in particular in OTT, where there was this editor by the name of Sean Ryan, which later he was hired by WWE, and he did these unbelievable video packages, and several of them were for Gunther and David Starr, for Gunther and Jordan Devlin, for their program. And I just, like, this guy is like the epitome of like your cornerstone heel champion that every babyface is trying to knock off. And you can make a lot of comparisons to a Brock Lesnar or a Vader in the early 90s, different comparison points. But that's always been a role that I've kind of always gravitated toward, is like the big boss type of character in a company. And I think Gunther has nailed that and been able to transfer it to a WWE main roster run, which, as we go through here, like the trajectory of Gunther, it's quite amazing when you look at the navigation of where he has gone from starting in Austria and, you know, through Germany, through Japan, and seamlessly moving to the main roster and becoming, you know, one of Paul Levesque's, you can see like major projects throughout the years.
Yeah, with also so what feels like so little change to his game as well.
That's
like,
right.
The fact that he's able to practically be the same guy for the past decade or so is quite astonishing, especially going through like NXT and going to the main roster. There's so many people that change and evolve and fit more of the WWE mold, the WWE house style. And it sort of has, you know, obviously we'll talk about this more when it comes to wrestling ability, but it sort of feels like, you know, I think if anything, he's changed to become more of a striker than more of a technical guy, or a submission guy rather. But at the very least, it's like the same energy. You said a great word, commanding. He is a guy that commanded a space. Whenever I first saw him on the Euro scene, I feel like the first match I saw him in was a match on, what was the promotion? Riptide Wrestling, where it was him versus Speedball Mike Bailey. That was like the first time I saw him, and it also helps because Mike Bailey is so much smaller than Gunther, a guy that can just, he's probably over 300 pounds at that point. Just a massive individual that it became like almost, when people say a throwback to the older days, this idea of a large obstacle for your babyface to overcome. And it was a simple match structure, but it worked effectively. Anytime I saw him, he probably still is, but for a long time, whenever I would talk about professional wrestling or introduce professional wrestling in some regard, and I try not to talk about it too much, I guess, day to day, I got to be so cool in some circles. But whenever I would like talk about someone and try to introduce who's someone right now that is interesting, I'm like, go to YouTube, type in Walter full match, and just see this guy, because this was the guy for me personally that exuded everything that I loved in professional wrestling. Just because I'm also a big Vader fan as well, so it was a little bit of a reincarnation for me. Obviously, a big Van Walter reincarnation for me. So it was enjoyable to be able to see this and see a modern person just fly swatting wrestlers out of his way. It truly became like he was at one point in time like my favorite wrestler in the world during more of his Euro indie scene stuff. So I just loved watching the guy so much. I don't want to blush too much about him. Blush is not the word, but whatever. But yeah, I think he's phenomenal. Let's talk a little bit about. I feel like most people know Walter. I gave a brief overview, but I think most people talk about him. So I think we'll dive into the criteria here as we go into it. But let's talk about working ability. We've kind of already touched it a little bit. He is a guy that, a massive dude. He is well-known chops, well-known submission holds, a guy that can splash off the top rope and scare anyone in the front row. He is an imposing figure in the ring. But how do you feel like he does, John, in translating his commandingness, his impositions onto his style professional wrestling? How do you think he effectively does this in his working ability?
So I think as we go through the categories, I think this is going to be his strongest area.
I fully agree.
As we're talking about his candidacy, what you and I have sort of described here about like this presence that he brings, he is tremendous in the role of like the overpowering bully, but in such a way, and this is to me what does separate him from maybe a Vader or a similar comparison, is that when it does come time for the undersized babyface to fight back, he can cower in such a way that to me never diminishes the aura of him, but it does show of like the bully that suddenly gets punched in the face and has to retreat, and it's this incredible babyface fire. And you can see that in the speedball match that Ryan mentioned. There's a great Darby Allin match that you can probably sketch this match in your head if you have not seen it, and this is around 2018 or so we're going years back before Darby was on national television. There were elements of it in the Jey Uso program, which is not the most fondly remembered for some, but watch Gunther in terms of how he was able to get the most out of being submitted by Jey Uso and getting that aspect of things. Like he is able to, I think, has the timing of when is the appropriate time to sell and milk it for multiple, for maximum efficiency. And he also has, I think, the benefit of like the booking of his character on the main roster where, okay, you get submitted by Jey Uso and then you commit a massacre on Pat McAfee coming out of WrestleMania. And it's sort of like the push-pull that always keeps him in the realm of like, here is the most dangerous guy in the high school cafeteria while still being able to sell when necessary, that it's not, the believability factor is never extinguished because it is like the babyface always has this fighting chance against Gunther. And I think that is, to me, what has separated him is the timing aspects of when to accelerate on the gas and when to slam on the brakes.
I think I'm so glad you brought up his selling, because it is I think it's fantastic, his selling ability, to exactly the point you're talking about, of being able to believably showcase, oh, the babyface, the underdog babyface is now getting something on me. The fact that he has figured out how to wade between these two, he's finding like the middle ground of that Venn diagram between a guy that is superimposing and you just look at him and you're like, how the hell am I going to beat this guy? To at the same time, a guy that's like, holy crap, he is beatable. He is a guy that, like, oh, when you watch him and you see like Jey Uso and you're like, oh my gosh, he is beatable. It is possible for someone to overcome this guy. He has found that nice middle point of someone that extreme, like, there's no way you can beat him, but oh no, there are some, not necessarily holes in his game, but that if you able to figure out, come in with a good game plan, you're able to tear down the building that is Walter, and you're able to beat him. And that action through strife, that action of defeating, overcoming this big thing, obviously is a massive relatable thing that a lot of people can go into, but it's someone that it's through him that if you play that game, if you play that psychology, you will get a massive babyface reaction, because he's able to help bring up the babyface, not just in getting, feeding emotion and sympathy for the babyface, but for being able to be like, okay, I'm going to help you look good. I'm going to help you look great to anyone and anybody that's watching this match.
Yeah, and this comes through in a big way with the series of matches he has with Jordan Devlin in OTT, and it's like everything that we are describing, I think, is at its apex in terms of those series of matches that they have, and this audience that is just living and dying with Jordan Devlin, and Walter is just playing this audience like a violin. Like, to me, it is one thing to be able to have, like, the the certain move set and so much on your character, but it to me is another level when it is in service of the match, it's in service of the babyface, and I think that is a big differentiating factor here, that this is a guy that is not afraid to show vulnerability, but in a way that he's never going to get sympathy from this crowd, but rather it's the comeuppance. It is that here is the guy that for all of his talk and bluster, like the wall can come crumbling down and this guy will submit at the right time, and it's used for heat instead of you're taking away from this guy's aura that he is able to maintain, and that comes with effective booking as well. It's not like I don't think Gunther would be valuable with going on some 20 match losing streak or something like you go through that degree with him, but it's losing at the right time, it's selling at the right time, and that's to me been a constant, especially in this WWE main roster run.
Now, before I throw a bunch of stats and figures and numbers at you, John, and listeners, I just want to just point out he wrestles so well, and obviously a great dance partner is going to get a great match, but he was able to have what I think a lot of people would say, and me including, a 5-star level match in the middle of COVID in an empty warehouse versus Ilya Dragunov on NXT UK for, I believe, for the title at that point.
Yes.
How probably the best match of the COVID era in terms of just like a pure singles match. The ability to be able to construct a match, wrestle style in front of, again, literally nobody. During the pandemic, no crowd, no one cheering on in any capacity, but be able to not only do that, but through the screen convey that babyface comeuppance over Walter. I don't remember if Walter lost that match or not, but the idea of Dragon, I do remember Dragunov and how much effort he was putting into that match, which is a great aspect of Ilya Dragunov. But the idea that they're able to convey that not just through the audience, which is obviously important, the audience in attendance in the arena, but to be able to convey that through the screen to us at home, that adds to his wrestling ability in my eyes.
Yes. First of all, with all due credit to one of my all-time favorite ridiculous matches of the COVID era, that being Kazuki Fujita and Go Shiozaki staring at one another. I mean, it is the I don't know, maybe this is the 2 girls 1 cup of pro wrestling matches, but I love that COVID era match. But yeah, this is this was Walter retaining the championship against Ilya Dragunov, and when you look at, like, that was the fascination with that entire era, was how do you transform pro wrestling that more than any sport is contingent on fan engagement, and how do you make it work? And part of the appeal, and I can't say I have a whole lot of desire to go back and relive most of this, it was watching a lot of companies and performers fail spectacularly in this entirely different world that they had never prepared for. Yeah. And some of the most successful ones, like I think Ring of Honor, who took a big break, they came back, they did their pure tournament, and that worked effectively well. And also something that I thought worked fairly well too was like the UFC with empty crowds, that you were able to appreciate a lot more of like the lack of fan engagement. And I think that's what NXT UK kind of tapped into. And this match is sort of the zenith point of that wrestling can be a really engaging product if you have the style of match that is simply that a Walter can lean into in such a way with Ilya Dragunov. And this did show you that with such an incredible lack of atmosphere, how you can create substitutes for that. And this is the match that I think many people will go back to, and this is not hampered at all by the lack of fans.
Let me throw some numbers at you, John, here. So this is as of May 11th, 2026, for people listening to this in the future. This is his top 5 matches on Cage Match currently. It's obviously the Dragunov match. It's 2 Dragunov matches, one in 2020 and one in 2021. He has Tyler Bate. He has the match with Sheamus and McIntyre, and he also has a match against Zack Sabre Jr. in progress. He has 137 matches rated 8 or higher on Cage Match. That's across 18 years. 90 of those matches are singles matches, which is about 2/3. 30 matches rated 9 or higher on Cage Match. Just to give some ballot comps here as well. Samoa Joe, 61 matches rated 8 or higher. Seth Rollins, 72 matches rated 8 or higher. Moxley, 106. And, not the same region, but I'm going to throw him in here anyway. Zack Sabre Jr., 215. So Zack Sabre Jr. obviously a lot more, but compared to people in his own region for Gunther, 137 over probably the next modern US, I just try to contain it to just modern stuff because of, past history, voting stuff. Moxley being 106. Phenomenal. This is a guy that has wrestled for almost 2 decades, consistently great high-level wrestling.
Yeah, and it's like in doing the research in the lead up to this, it's kind of taken for granted as well. Like when you certainly like the WWE, like whatever you want to call like it's sort of preferred style. It's not going to be everyone's cup of tea, but it's undeniable that Walter has upped that quality significantly. Like the match quality that he has brought to WWE. I think it's raised it significantly. Like the number of 5-star matches that this guy has had in a WWE setting, that is not always the intended goal. I think that's really significant. It's the environment of which he is in versus, quite frankly, if he was in an AEW, if he had gone to New Japan Pro Wrestling instead of signing with WWE at the time in 2019. Yeah. I mean, what his, what the avenue would be if he was doing this guy very well could have been an IWGP champion that was doing 7 big matches per year plus a G1 run every single year, and it would have been that much more impressive. So the
alternate reality that I would have loved to live in there.
I mean, in a world where we get Jun Kasai and Best of Super Juniors and Gunther in the G1, but I think that's very significant in and of itself of the quality of what he has brought to not just NXT but the main roster as well.
One interesting note I want to put in here for that data I just presented, hasn't had a 9+ rated match since 2023, according to Cage Match Users, which is interesting to me. Because I think when did he go to the main roster? I believe it was 2022 is when he came onto the main roster. And not having a 9+ rated, that's obviously a very high watermark. And obviously there's some other aspects probably playing into it in terms of the cage match of it all. But not having anyone 9+ since 2023, I think is interesting. I don't necessarily personally feel like a guy that, and I should say 2023. I think that last match was in 2023, April. I think it was that WrestleMania match, the triple threat with Sheamus and McIntyre. But since WrestleMania weekend 2023, I should say, to clarify, I don't necessarily see that as a massive he had a massive dip in his wrestling ability anyway. I think if anything, maybe it's a level of competition. Obviously, not every single wrestler in WWE is of a high standard. No offense, Jey Uso, but he is a guy that he is going. I think in some ways, he helps level up a lot of guys. He is that benchmark that you sort of spoke to. He is the measuring stick for a lot of professional wrestlers in WWE, and to a degree, he is. Maybe there's an argument to him at least helping being the tide that helps raise all ships.
Yeah, and it's also when you look at this period, and yes, he has had the heavyweight championship run in all of this, but there was a period he was going through, he was largely removed from pay-per-views. He was basically doing his matches on television for a long period of time. So I think in WWE that is a handicap. He's more featured now, getting that, but it was also just a series where, his biggest matches, he wasn't getting the platform for them either as well. And that's not to say that it's a slam dunk that he would have just been running roughshod with pay-per-view quality matches. But I always found that interesting that a lot of his bigger matches, they did save for television.
Yeah. I see him as a phenomenally great wrestler. I think in terms of his peak wrestling ability, I'm looking at 2017. Maybe you can go back to 2016 as well. To now, I would still say he's on the top in terms of wrestling ability. And obviously, the style has changed significantly, or leveled up significantly since I would say 2019. But I think he's still Hall of Fame level, one of the best in the world, 2017 to 2021. One of the best in the world, obviously coming from a big part of that period was during the European indie scene. So he was a massive standout. He won multiple years of a European MVP in the Wrestling Observer Awards, which we can talk a little bit about later. But yeah, I mean, maybe there's a little bit of a step back in more recent years just because of diversity of opponents and who other wrestlers are in WWE, but it's still a very high level. I mean, he has high level matches versus higher level opponents like a Punk, like a John Cena, like an AJ Styles. He still has the game. It's not like it really has died down. I think it's just that difference of opponent quality, I guess you could say. But I think I think you're 100% right. I fully agree with you. Slam dunk, probably Hall of Fame wrestler for at least the past decade or so.
Yeah, like he's going to be like that is going to be his strongest argument for people as not just like as a strong like work rate candidate, but for the longevity that he's been doing it. And he's 39 now. It's not a style that you can completely dismiss. Like, could he go another 10 years at this style? Mm-hmm. Yes. Like the idea of like Gunther and Zack Sabre Jr. having a match in their mid-50s, is that improbable? No. So it's like I'm not watching him and necessarily thinking that this is going to be winding down for him. Like he has not dialed it down too much in terms of as he is getting older, being on in a WWE schedule. The question will be like the output when it comes to the lack of live events for the company, mm-hmm. for the amount of matches he's going to be able to get in a given year. But he could very well do like the idea of him doing a post WWE European indie run is not out of the question. I'd be very curious what a non WWE Walter would like. Maybe this will be a guy that just totally disappears from pro wrestling and we never hear from this guy again. He goes off into live off the rest of his life. He has probably made more money than he could have fathomed when he was Big Daddy Walter. It'll be an interesting, next decade for this guy, but we could also be here in a decade and he's still in WWE in some capacity.
Yeah, I think that's fully plausible. If we don't have any more things to say about wrestling ability, I think we move on to drawing power as the sort of next category here. Not very strong, and obviously we're going to move into two categories that are not necessarily strongs for a different reason. Drawing power is very limited because there's so little data. You spoke to it already, John, that a lot of his bigger matches are showcased onto television, and to that point, he has had, based on the stuff that I looked at, he has had 8 pay-per-views in WWE that had 10,000, just pick the number, 10,000 plus attendance. That was him main eventing or semi-main eventing. For even higher, 16,000 plus, which is about a third of WWE's promotional history, on average, that's about a third. That's 7 main events and semi-main events. And these are incredibly small numbers. That obviously includes NXT as well. These are incredibly small numbers for someone. What I do find interesting about that data, though, is that every single one of those are a single match for him. He is somebody that it's when he is on a pay-per-view in front of a lot of people, it is a singles match. It's a high-level singles match, and it's going to do really well. There's not much there in terms of longevity or these sort of things, but there's a lot of stuff I think that is interesting when it comes to the television of it all, the indie level of it all. But I know you're champion of the bit here, John. So what are your thoughts on Gunther as a drawing power as regards to the Hall of Fame?
Yeah, this one is a lot tougher. Like he has never been the focused upon star in WWE. He's sort of been, adjacent to that spot. It would have been really interesting had we got the Cena retirement match on a platform like NBC, and not that Gunther would have necessarily gotten all of the credit for that. It was Cena's retirement, but he was the opponent chosen for it, and I think that would have done a giant audience on NBC. But we're not going to get the Peacock data for that. It's difficult because I think we are going to have several of these candidates, and when it comes to so in preparation here, I tried to do some reporting, Ryan, and I did reach out to our good friend Alan Cunahan and
yes.
tried to navigate like his influence on the European scene. And Alan, by the way, has Gunther in his top 50 for his greatest wrestler ever ballot as well. So he thinks very highly of the man, and he believes like when it comes to the resurrection of the European scene that was on its ass in the mid 2000s, he credits Walter and Zack Sabre Jr. as being the most influential for resurrecting that scene. Which, if you were not around in like 2017, like, the European scene was on fire. It was just such a incredible atmosphere. It was spread across so many companies. They were bringing in some of the biggest independent talent across the world. Now, the unfortunate part is that when they kind of removed themselves from the scene, and there were a lot of factors from speaking out to NXT UK, that, you know, the European scene took like a massive hit afterwards. I don't think it has recovered to that level, but he was a huge factor in that. Stayed, you know, he was very content to just stay in Germany and run the WXW training school. And I did not realize this. Like, when he gets hired to run the gym or run the training school, he's working full time for WXW. Like, he's working full time in professional wrestling. So he's in a very like unique spot. It's not like he's supplementing his income elsewhere, and this is like a weekend warrior type of thing for him. Like, he's fully in on this. But there's a ceiling when it comes to it, like a WXW or like coming over for Evolve or PWG. Yep. And the same can be extrapolated to like NXT. It's just like the drawing is not going to be there for Gunther at this point. And it becomes very difficult in like the position he is in presently today of how much you assign to him versus like WWE is in a very advantageous position where they can announce Survivor Series is coming to XYZ Stadium in November, and they will sell 80% of their tickets on that on sale, and then we will plot in the matches. Whereas, you know, a Matchroom Boxing or a Top Rank Boxing, like, they can't just announce, hey, we're running a stadium November 17th, buy your tickets now, and we'll tell you the main event 4 weeks out. And that's, I mean, that's not a new phenomenon in WWE. That's something any, you know, top star has to contend with. But as we've seen over these last number of years, like, there are difference makers that WWE has. I don't think Gunther has crossed the threshold to become a difference maker yet.
I have 2 points to that. I'm going to put the Euro indie scene in a pin here, and sure. I'm going to talk about exactly what we talked about with Gunther. That when he gets to America and he gets to the main roster, it is a guy that the brand of WWE is such a big money mover. You know, when it comes to live events, to pay-per-views, and obviously have live events, house shows and whatnot decreasing as well, but that's a different story. He is such a big, I would argue that he is at the very least a TV star for the company. Yes. When the brand is also so big when it comes to selling tickets and whatnot. Do you think, especially since we talked about this earlier with Nick Khan, especially since the business has changed so much to become television being a driver for business for WWE especially. Well, there's a lot of drivers, but for wrestling in general, do you think when it comes to this Hall of Fame in a modern sense, that we should look at TV stars as potentially more valuable to a company's profitability, especially since these TV deals are so grand?
I think that overall, like I haven't explored this topic enough, but we could like
I'm throwing a fastball at you.
No, I appreciate it, because I think that goes to my point here, that I think in the next years, I think we're going to have to assess like the criteria too of just like observer Hall of Famers as well. That, you know, the idea of somebody that is like Gunther is kind of this interesting test case of somebody that clearly had a lot of influence in the European market. He has certainly been like a net positive since going to WWE, and it is sort of how do we break down and assess that. And I do agree, like, as television has become the lifeblood in many of these cases when it comes to like guaranteed revenue, like, what do we define as a successful TV wrestler on top of it? It's, in some ways, WWE is less incentivized than ever to produce big matches, to peak to certain dates, because all of the revenue is guaranteed. All you're working towards is your next renewal that you're hopefully going to get an increase. Like, there's certainly the impetus to maintain and grow your audience, but the idea of, this being 1984 and Memphis has to sell at the Mid-South Coliseum every Monday night, like, that is out the window. And it's sort of like we can run SmackDown without anything announced. We can run Raw with like a bare bones lineup in advance, and the audience is sort of trained to know that, hey, Raw is coming to town. It's a big deal. A pay-per-view is a bigger deal. WrestleMania is WrestleMania. So I'm going in a roundabout way here, but I think that with your like someone like a Gunther, the idea that we're talking about him being like more focused on television matches, like, that's certainly not a negative. In some ways, it's like he represents, like, it was more so during his title run, but like he regains the title from Jey Uso, not on a big pay-per-view event. It's on an episode of Raw, and building up to those matches that you can make the argument, like, there is more incentive to build for like a 3-week build and do a number on Netflix than it is to go today on ESPN, but a year ago on Peacock, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, the brand at this point is sort of driving the ticket sales for a lot of these destinations, for Raw, SmackDown, for TV, and obviously for pay-per-views, especially bigger time pay-per-views like Mania, Rumble, Survivor Series, SummerSlam, etc. But it is this thing of, like, if TV is such this driver, what is the sort of, I hate using this word, content that is on your television set that is going to get people to continuously come back? And obviously there's a whole plethora of ratings discussion, especially what's happening with Nielsen right now in the past year or so, that really throws this whole argument of how do we track any of this information? But it's this idea of that I was just pondering about in the past week or so of, is someone that is a TV star, that's someone that we're going to put these bigger matches, like, I would agree, a Gunther. It happened with his world title reign. I would say it also probably happened a little bit with his IC title reign as sort of a tester. Is this something that is going to drive people to go watch their television, which in turn can help increase the revenue for the company, as it, continuously does for the past several years?
Yeah, like, it's like in many ways, like, their ability to maintain their audience on Netflix is of high importance. And yes, like, the revenue is guaranteed. There's also an opt-out that Netflix has. And these are kind of it's the double-edged sword of your guaranteed revenue, is that there is an end date. Like, when this Saudi Arabia deal comes up, and like, if that doesn't get renewed, they can't just magically say, hey, we're $100 million short every year because the Saudi Arabia deal did not get renewed. It's finding that value elsewhere. And that's going to be the pressure, like, if any of these deals fall through. But when it comes to the purposes of these arguments, like, the idea in 10 years from now is SmackDown off television and exclusively streaming, and how much data are we really going to get? Like, it sounds like it's like trying to secure the Pentagon Papers to get, like, HBO Max viewership. It's like, it blows my mind. And like, I don't doubt him at all. I've asked him directly, and it's like, Tony Khan does not get this data, and that's mind boggling to me. Like, forget the idea that, booking wise, that's a huge handicap to not know what's landing, or at least having a fulsome view of your audience. Think about it from, like, a marketing standpoint. Like, your AEW sales, and you're going out to secure advertising, and it's like, okay, what's your total audience that we're reaching? Well, we know what our television audience is, asterisk Nielsen, but HBO Max, we don't know. But just spend as if, like, that blows my mind that they don't have that to operate with. And it's going to be similar, that I think a lot of these streaming outlets we're going to see less information coming out, and that's going to make it also just opens the aperture of just trying to assign, like, what is a difference maker, what is our crowd reaction is going to be people's default. It's like all these weird esoteric
merch sales is always
it can go in all these different directions when you get away from like hard data that we can just assign to someone. That, you know, in the territorial days, it was a lot easier to see, like, we knew exactly when a stipulation worked, we knew exactly when this match drew, when this challenger did not connect in this part of the country. Like, it was a lot more black and white, and today there's a lot more discrepancy, and that's probably going to continue. But, you know, the value of these media rights deals are imperative to this company, and somewhere in this is the influence of the talent that is ultimately the product. You could not come back next Monday and just put on a variety show of wrestlers you've never heard of, and as much as people believe it's the brand, like, as a collective, it still is the talent, and there's always going to be a tiered system.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Wonder. Obviously, you know, we're recording this May 16th, 2026, happening right now. In the midst of it, Darby Allin continuously defending the world title on television, obviously building all up to a massive match at Double or Nothing for title versus hair versus MJF. But this idea of, like, we're putting these things on television, and AEW has obviously proved in the past several years that they are not afraid to showcase big television events and put big matches on TV, like Kenny Omega versus Bryan Danielson, for example, on TV to maybe drive television viewership to a certain degree. It's whenever I talk about modern U.S. and candidates here on the ballot, there's always this comeback to of, like, how does the brand evolve? How does the wrestler have an aspect of things? Because it feels so almost segmented, I guess, to a degree of, like, you know, it feels like, oh, WWE is such a brand that it doesn't matter what everything is. And yeah, it's like, if you look at the hard-nosed numbers that everyone's sort of operated for the past several years, decades, of looking at the Hall of Fame, looking at Hall of Famers, looking at drawing data, it's always been pay-per-views. But Gunther, when it comes to his WWE run and looking at these bigger live event numbers, and obviously there's the indie aspect, which again, the pin's still listed here. But you look at a guy that, like, WWE ticket sales, so much of it is, like, you could say, have been sort of messed with because he's not necessarily the driver because of the branding of it all. So I like to have these conversations all the time because it is I think it's almost an ever evolving conversation of, like, how do we assess, especially right now with Nielsen, how do we assess modern, I would say, since, what was the SmackDown deal? 2017, I think 2018, the SmackDown Fox deal.
Yeah, it went into effect 2019 and was signed the year earlier.
2018, yeah. But since then, it's like, it's a sort of a conversation of how do we sort of talk about these, and how do we look at the drawing datas? Does working purely at pay-per-view numbers and purely at attendance like that, does that still exist? Does that data still work in this modern sense? I think that's sort of, for me, an almost ever evolving conversation.
Yeah, and, you know, it's sort of also it's segmented too in certain ways, where we look at WWE and it's like, now, you know, a year ago they were pulling in, you know, 13 to 14,000 people in some of these arenas. Now it's like 9,000. It's like, oh my God, 9,000 people. And then we're looking at, you know, AEW on a much smaller scale that is not drawing all that well week to week for its television. And so you lean towards, you know, pay-per-view numbers that are going to skew from like 120,000 to, you know, 170,000 for a great show. And we're sort of looking at, you know, different assessments. And, you know, like a Darby Allin, has it led to a big influx in weekly TV for these title defenses? It is not, but the quality has been unbelievable. And you also are building up to this pay-per-view that is, granted, they were selling well before this match was announced, but you know, this is something that it seems like if this pay-per-view does well, that's going to be the big mark of distinction for Darby Allin as champion, and the stipulation attached with MJF. But it's sort of like, what do we view as success at an AEW level? What do we view as success at a WWE level? And maybe we'll get into it, like, on, like, the European independent scene. Like, how are we assessing that move? Like, if if WXW had been drawing, 400 people every month, and then for a big 16 carat built around XYZ coming in, and they do 2,000 people, I mean, that's still a mark of achievement. If you are increasing your attendance, it's just in scale of what we are comparing it to. And I think we somewhat do have to diversify candidates of what they mean in their given geographical region and what the movement of 400 to 2,000 means versus going to a WWE where it gets a lot more esoteric when it comes to deciphering strict difference makers as opposed to some of these more clear-cut movements that a performer can bring to that company.
And bringing up the Euro indie scene as well, it's also that conversation of, let's say you're bringing home 400 attendees for a smaller show every single time. What's the size of the building? Is that a sellout every single week? These are sort of the data that I feel like it almost gets lost as the years go on, even if it was only like a decade ago or so. But it's this thing of, and then it's, and that's also comes down to the Hall of Fame conversation, because I think that's also a long-standing thing that it's always been sort of, when he looks at drawing data, always sort of been skewed the WWE. I brought up $10,000 as a random number, but you and I both know that is a number that a lot of voters, a lot of people say like is their benchmark of, well, how many 10,000 seat arenas? How many times did they sell out the Garden or something? To pull out a Roddy Piperism. This sort of idea of like hitting these specific benchmarks, but were they draws in these smaller towns? These are arguments for like Ring of Honor, for example. When you look at like a guy like the Briscoes or Samoa Joe, for example, how do these things help their case? A guy like Kenta, who's going on the ballot later this year, obviously in Noah and Pro Wrestling Noah, these sort of smaller promotions that don't necessarily have the bigger stage of and can consistently hit this threshold of 10,000, but how are they in their market? How did it help? How did Walter in Europe, for example, help grow the market across Europe, not just in WXW, but also with Progress in Germany, OTT in Ireland? How did he help grow the market as a whole?
Yeah, and you set my mind on this as well. Is like the 10,000 figure, like that is sort of indicative of this conversation. Like AEW this year, just to use an example. By the end of this year, AEW, the number of shows that they're going to do that are going to draw in excess of 10,000, you can probably count on two hands with fingers left over. However, this is a company that's got $185 million in television revenue coming in. That is not including pay-per-view revenue. So the idea of like using like 10,000 tickets, so sure, it would be great if they did 10,000 people every week for Dynamite, but that is not... Are they going to be losing money because they're not doing that? No, it's like that shows you like what their success metrics are going to be weighted towards. And it's what is the contribution of your talent towards these bigger guaranteed revenue deals and how we assess all of this. It's a really interesting discussion because I think the industry is moving more towards like all the changing media landscape as well. And I just think we have to look at that as well with some of these candidates and such of how they play a factor. Because you can also make the rule like that a lot of talent in these companies are interchangeable to a certain degree, that they have less leverage than ever. But we can also see when stars catch fire, like what the difference is in business. WWE is not, there was a time that in like 2019, it was just, well, it's this turnkey operation and it creative doesn't matter. Well, when creative got a lot better, it did matter. And we saw that, look at that, business goes up when you have super baby faces and you have long-term stories and it's a more compelling product and you created new fans and business went up. So there is still that difference maker, but there is certainly a cushioning when you're WWE and you have all of these deals in place that if creative hits a wall, it's not like your business is collapsing overnight.
So I think ultimately we could both agree, Gunther, not a Hall of Fame level draw in any sort of imagination.
Yes, after our dissertation on the modern pro wrestling media economy.
No, yeah, look, it's like I said, it is an important conversation. One of the reasons why I'm asking to come on to the show is for this conversation, for this discussion, because I think it is massively important to reckon with when it comes to the Hall of Fame. And luckily Gunther worked out as like a perfect pick, because he is someone that I think is a perfect sort of weirdly candidate that falls into this discussion of a guy that, yeah, he doesn't have a lot of the pay-per-view stuff. A lot of his stuff is on TV. A lot of his stuff is on smaller levels. But how important is it? When we look at pay-per-view numbers, it's like, I'm going to say he's not a Hall of Famer. Look, I looked at pay-per-view numbers. I'm a big old nerd. I have attendance data written out from for WWE, TNA, AEW, NXT. The only thing I think I miss, WCW, the only thing I'm missing is like Ring of Honor. And like compared to US companies in this sort of time frame, Gunther I have in terms of pay-per-view levels and all this sort of stuff. He is on the same level as Sid Vicious, Adam Page, The Miz, Bobby Lashley, and Scott Steiner. That is sort of where he was listed in terms of all of the data I correlated down.
Fine company.
Fine company. And it's like, am I going to call any of these guys Hall of Fame level draws? Of course not. Of course I'm not. But I would say that like a good number of these people are probably TV level draws easily. That I think, and a lot of the other people that he's surrounding are TV level draws. And these people, and this is what got me started, is that these people obviously are important to their company they serve. And for a time like now, is that arguably more important? And I think that is a discussion that I'm glad we had, and I want people to think about, because I think it's going to be an increasingly difficult conversation, especially with Nielsen, whatever the heck they're doing. It's going to be an increasingly difficult conversation that we have to sort of reckon with as the media landscape is changing.
Yeah, and it's a difficult period because it almost feels like the language is changing that we are discussing these criteria in, and you know, an incomplete scoreboard that like Nielsen provides, that, I mean, whatever value you want to put into Netflix's like weekly numbers that take, quantum physics to be able to break down. This is like
the lack of HBO numbers that exist.
Like that's a huge portion of it. And even like AEW pay-per-view numbers, like it's reliant on, Dave's estimates that he's getting from cable providers, but it's, these are very important figures that, we're ultimately judging upon. And I feel it's only going to get more difficult, because I could certainly see like the more move towards streaming. I think it's going to be left to less and less data that is out there to be able to break down, at least when it comes to like individual candidates versus like TKO putting out its earnings report, and you can get a good sense of the health of the company, but that doesn't necessarily break it down to like individual accomplishments, achievements. What does this person mean versus the lack of this person in a high profile spot? So these are all discussions that I think, I think the Hall of Fame process itself might go through an evolutionary stage over the next couple of years, as well as you kind of assess what this landscape continues to change into.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Last category here, last criteria, rather, I should say. Historical significance, obviously looking at a positive manner. Again, I think it's similar to drawing power, where it's in different instance where it's like, it's not necessarily weak. It's just not enough time has passed. That happens with a lot of modern US and Canada people, or just modern wrestlers in general, where it's just like not enough time has really passed. Obviously, I think there's some things here. Something of like drawing powers, like there's some stuff here, and extremely, as you noted, and as Alan Farrell noted as well, an extremely important figure to the growth of the British European, the European indie scene in the 2010s. An extremely important figure, and also like I fully agree that him and Zack Sabre Jr. are probably number one and number two. I don't know, you can probably interchange them, but also like a lasting name from that scene. Like there's not many people that are like from that, well, for many reasons, why from that scene that's still around today. Some that are speaking out, and NXT UK just engulfed them, like a Tyler Bate, and just I don't know where that guy is. I assume he's somewhere vacationing somewhere on the beaches of, I don't know, Mexico. There's not a lot of people. It's like him, Saber, Osprey, probably you can maybe say, but even then at that point he's in Japan. I mean, Tony Storm is probably a lasting name from the Euro scene as well. There's not a lot of names, and he is arguably, you could maybe argue, at the forefront of that by being a guy that has been
worldwide. I would certainly say he is like above Zach. I mean, on a worldwide basis, like to me, for many WWE fans, like he is, European wrestling. Like it's funny. We're talking the day after an episode of SmackDown where they have set up Cody and Gunther for Italy. Italy. And Joe Tessitore is like, they're going to be on Gunther's home turf. It's like his home turf. It's like he commands the entire continent of Europe.
Yes.
This is a home game for him. All of the European nations fall under Gunther's grasp. It's like he's going to be on home turf in Italy. So it's like they've just given Europe to Gunther.
And he deserves it. And he deserves it. I mean, to a certain degree, what we're talking about, he was a massive important guy for the past 20 years for Europe.
Like, I do think there is like historical significance. Is he going to be at the top of the list when it comes to like the modern candidates? No, but there's definitely something there. I think it's too early to really look at that assessment. I think he's going to have like a really outstanding like WWE career that still has years left on it. I think that, and it's also one where I don't feel he's going to be like there are some performers we have seen go well into their 40s. I mean, AJ Styles recently retiring, Punk presently, like Gunther, as I mentioned before, like he can go for years if he so chooses. Yeah. And I think by the end of his career, it's going to be like, does he get that one really big defining run as like the top heel? Does he get a babyface run? Like all these different unexplored areas that he could reach. But like, I certainly don't discount like what he meant on the European scene. And like, I don't think people appreciate like just how dead that scene was in the early 2000s, that it was a pretty like lifeless part of the world when it came to professional wrestling. And, you know, it wasn't him alone, but he was a big factor. He stayed there for a long time when he had offers to go elsewhere and really cultivated that scene. I think he's in, you know, WXW has been, you know, for its part of the world, like 16 Karat has become like a pretty standout part of the wrestling calendar. Every year there's been a lot of great talent that have come out of there, and conversely a lot of big talent that came in there to work with that local scene. And, you know, his role goes beyond just, you know, top guy at WXW. Like, he was working with the group there, helping to run the company, running the training school. And I think there's merit to that on the list. Is it Hall of Fame worthy yet? I would say no, but like these are areas that I think in Europe, it's probably valued a lot more than from the US consumer about what his pre-WWE career entailed. And just the final thing too on influence I'll go back to is coming into NXT. It was one thing, like he made the transition very, very well, but it was going to the main roster and it was just the final, like it's almost to the week of the Wall Street Journal story coming out on Vince McMahon. So he's coming in at the ultimate turmoil period where it's like Vince McMahon is, you know, he does his first exit in the summer of 2022. He gets the IC title, goes on that huge run of 666 days. And like the match quality, I don't think you can deny that he has elevated it greatly. In like that three-way we were just discussing earlier with Sheamus and Drew McIntyre, in another era, that's a match that is probably celebrated in WWE history as one of the great WrestleMania matches of all time. Yep. And it speaks to the current diet of matches that is probably a match that people don't even think twice about. And that's a big difficulty, I think, when it comes to great matches standing out today that last the test of time beyond that like 48-hour window where everyone's gushing over one specific match because they're going to get hundreds of them in a given year. So I think it's somewhat even more difficult to stand out as a work-based candidate today.
I mean, yeah. I mean, like I spoke about earlier, and that's sort of, I guess, what I was trying to get to is that, you know, he hasn't had a 9+ rated match on Cage Match since that triple threat that we were talking about. That, you know, I sort of think about, like, is it, when I see that number, I think to myself, or see that figure, I think to myself, you know, is it because his game has gone down? I'm like, no, I don't really think it's that. I mean, kind of in terms of other wrestlers he's wrestling, but I also think it's like, to what we're talking about, the level of wrestling has increased so significantly in the modern U.S. Canada realm that there is a higher bar. There's a higher bar for a lot of people maybe to clear. I have felt that way where it's like you'll watch a match that exactly what you're talking about. Maybe a decade ago, I would have been like, oh, this is a 4-star match. And I'll rewatch it and be like, oh, you know, it's it's fine or whatever. Because we're seeing a plethora every single week, at least in America, but also around the world, but a plethora every single week of just high level matches. There is a more great wrestling out there that the bar has been raised. Speaking of Sheamus, what about, is there anything about sort of having this, and obviously it's a little bit of a gimmick that they've applied to Gunther as of late, is there any sort of value when it comes to sort of historical significance? Because sometimes when I look at historical significance, I think of defining it as like almost like the canon of professional wrestling. Is there any sort of value when it comes to having this sort of retiree career killer gimmick for Gunther as a guy that over the course of less than a year, I think it was 7 months, retiring, quote unquote, as of this moment of recording, retiring Goldberg, Cena, AJ Styles? Is there anything to that when it comes to his case of, you know, of the guy that's chosen to be that sort of name that retires these three guys?
6 months after the Cena retirement, it kind of feels like no, but I think in time we're probably going to put more stock into this, that he was the guy that they went with for all of these aspects. The Goldberg match is also, I'm glad you brought that up, because that was the last NBC show. And instead of that being like this big retirement spectacle, it really kind of got thrown into like, here was the counter to AEW that weekend, and going against All in Texas, and it sort of became like it was almost like they sacrificed this show, and the remnants of that was, well, they got pulled from NBC as a result of that last show. In time, maybe we will look back at it. It's sort of like, where does this career killer streak end? Does it ultimately make a guy that stops Gunther, or like? It's hard to go much higher at this point than Cena. So it kind of feels like you've reached the peak of where you can go. Like even following up with AJ, like the month later, great match. But you've sort of, to me, kind of wrung out as much as you can of, like squeezed as much as you can out of like Gunther going over these people. Certainly, like if they were to do something with a Brock, you could add that to the list, but I think it's one of those that I can't say Gunther has like entered this new stratosphere as a result of all of these wins. At least, 6 months after the Cena win, I don't feel like he's any stronger than he was before, but he was also at like a pretty solid level going into that match too. So it's not like this mark of shame either.
I'm glad you brought up the Brock thing of it all, because it is interesting, because it wasn't Gunther picked for that. It was Obafemi, and obviously a guy that's way younger, a guy they're trying to establish, but a guy that they currently have Gunther as this career killer gimmick. And obviously this was not announced as a seemingly retirement for Brock Lesnar, but instead it was a match chosen for Obafemi. Maybe that's also partly a Obafemi being a babyface versus Gunther being a heel. Maybe that's obviously part of it, versus Brock Lesnar. So, but it is interesting that they I don't think they moved on in any sort of real way, but it's sort of interesting that they're shifting it also to Obafemi. Hey, maybe that's a big matchup down the line. Probably it is a big matchup down the line. There was one other point I was going to make about him and retirements. Oh yeah, I think I said it at the beginning of the show, is that I imagine also they were going to continue a little bit. I surmised that it was probably going to be a Rey Mysterio match at Mania, just because of the whole start of the Dragon Lee, which had a whole weird Twitter thing. Rey Mysterio suddenly disappears, and he's injured, supposedly, but comes back in the ladder match at Mania. I don't know. I mean, who the heck knows what happened there? But
I'll just say, like, this year's WrestleMania was so chaotic. Like I periodically got like updates on like where the card was going. Then it was like, okay, this has totally changed. Now that's going this direction. Of course, there were injury. Like I don't think anyone got ping ponged more than Seth Rollins this year, and ultimately that ended up with Gunther. But this was a Mania that I didn't specifically hear about the Gunther Ray match, but that's not to say that it was not thrown out there, because they did tease it on television. But this was a very it just seemed like this was a WrestleMania that they just could not settle on one coherent direction. And there were also some forces out of their control injury-wise. But Yeah, I would say ultimately it's not like Gunther's position at WrestleMania was a big one. It was sort of like we were plugging in holes, and he ended up getting the Rollins opponent spot.
I really don't have any more big things to say about historical significance. We can move on. Other stuff, he has Observer Awards. He was a first place European MVP from 2018 to 2020. He went down to second place in 2021. And then I'm looking only at top 3 Wrestling Observer Awards, I should say. And then didn't get top 3 in any award until 2025, where he got third place for the Bryan Danielson Award. So not really a lot I have much to say. Again, I think it goes back to this idea that there is so much time left to tell in terms of it. I fully agree. I could easily see his career going at least a decade more. I think you said he's only 39 right now. So I could easily see going a decade further. It is sort of this thing of, what is his going to be a long lasting influence? Is he going he is such a, it feels like he has such a distinct style of wrestling, a psychology, a match output, a striking ability, and maybe obviously a lot of it comes from his size. But it is that going to have a long lasting influence on sort of wrestling as it moves forward. These are the sort of things that, for a lot of these guys in modern US and Canada, time will tell. What is the sort of influence that they're going to have on the American scene? And, I think there's a little bit, but it's, we just need more time to figure it out.
Yeah. And it's not Gunther specific, but I do feel like in this last decade, if you're an aspiring European-based wrestler I think if you were going back 15 years, for instance, I think a lot of people getting into wrestling in that part of the world, they were looking at it for maybe I get to Japan. Mostly it's, I really love wrestling. I want to do this. And now there's a distinct pipeline to WWE. It is not some crazy dream that you can start off in any of these European countries that Gunther rules over, according to WWE, that you can make it to WWE. And much like I think a whole contingent of New Japan stars looked at Nakamura going to WWE, and he's had his high points. He's definitely, it's not like a slam dunk success. But looking at Okada too, it's now that's an option for Japanese wrestlers. And I think for many in the European scene, they're going to see somebody like a Gunther who, just body type and such, I don't think anyone would have pegged to be successful on the main roster. And, he himself realized that, I think, get it totally transforming his body. But now it's Gunther succeeding to the level he has. I think that's going to have a big influence. NXT UK did that to a degree too. But now you have that whole continent that I think sees WWE as a very realistic possibility if you have the aptitude for this.
Yeah. Ultimately, I think it's, for me, the beginnings of a very strong case. We talked about his Hall of Fame working ability, but drawing and historical significance, it's just time will sort of tell on a lot of these sort of things. Do you have any big closing thoughts before we talk about the sort of category as the region as a whole?
Yeah,
or things you need to say as well.
Yeah, it's just, I find him to be, I think it's a tough year for him to become a candidate here. And the criteria is what the criteria is. He's on the list. I think this is somebody that years down the road, I could very well see myself voting for. I cannot fathom I'll be voting for him this year. But I do wonder if it's last year, Drew McIntyre fell off the ballot, and I'm sure there are some that will look at him potentially having a stronger case than Gunther, or at least a comparable one. And that's, I see Gunther closer to that comparison point than someone that's going to mount much of support for this stage of his career that largely, most are going to be voting for it upon his WWE career, and it's far from over. And I think many are just going to table this one for his first year of eligibility.
Yeah, I tend to agree, especially with, you also have 3 other WWE wrestlers returning to the ballot in Batista, Kane, and Booker T. That, if you heard my Booker T episode, I wasn't too kind on his Hall of Fame candidacy. But
are you going to do a Kane episode?
Yes, actually.
Oh my God, with Tom Waller.
No, I didn't reach out to Tom Waller. Maybe I should have. It was a.
He's the only man I could imagine that could give you 90 minutes supporting Kane.
I guess I could say it now. It's the plan is for it to be the next episode after this one, and it was requested by Adam Berger months ago. The moment Kane went on the ballot, he requested it. So it's so much so that I forced Fred to do the Booker T episode with me to sort of appease that also in a weird way. I don't know. So yeah, the next episode, the plan is for that to be Kane and talk about it, because Adam is coming at it as he sees him as a potential vote for Adam, or at the very, I shouldn't say that. At the very least, a good candidate that should be considered for votes.
Okay, well, I will enter with an open mind and listen.
Hey, that's the goal of all these episodes, I guess. Let's talk about the region as a whole, modern use in Canada. Let me put this on the screen for you. I'm sure you have it in front of you as well, but let me put this on the screen for us. So modern use in Canada, this year there are 17 acts as of current. Obviously, Dave has the tendency to maybe add people at the last minute for various reasons. So what that means right now is that there are 5 votes you can put into this region. The members, or the candidates rather, for this region right now are Mark and Jay Briscoe, Samoa Joe, Matt and Jeff Harney, the Steiner brothers, John Moxley, Randy Orton, Becky Lynch, Adam Copeland, Bill Goldberg, The Outsiders, Mercedes Moné, Trish Stratus, Seth Rollins, Dave Bautista, Kane, Booker T, and of course Gunther. John, I asked this for everyone. If you have any thoughts on the region, but ultimately you have 5 votes. Where are you sitting right now when it comes to the Hall of Fame in this region?
So I did pull up my ballot from last year, and I did vote for the 5 maximum last year, which I don't always max out my ballot. But for this region, I did last year, and a bunch of votes opened up because I did vote for CM Punk, Cody Rhodes, and Sabu, who all got in. I also voted for the Briscoes and John Moxley last year. So as I mentioned, once I vote for someone, I'm going to most likely keep them on my ballot. So I do imagine voting for the Briscoes and Moxley again this year. I think Moxley at this point, I don't know. The case has become so strong for me on Moxley that I feel he's a very strong candidate and has been like the year in, year out performance that he has put in. I think the whole lead up to All in Texas last year, the work that he has done throughout the Continental Classic, now the stuff with Ospreay, I'm pretty high on John Moxley, and it was it just to me has grown each year as well. Beyond those two, I feel Becky Lynch, as we continue in this present incarnation of Becky Lynch in the heel role, I just feel like the support is going to, the longer we get away from like 2018, 2019, I do feel like the support is going to go down for Becky Lynch unless there is like a big revitalization and she becomes like a marquee player in WWE, that she feels like she's a really strong supporting character. She's very good in the role, but I think like her money was as a top end babyface, and I don't see myself voting for Becky Lynch this year. Of the newer ones, I would say that Dave Bautista presents an interesting case because he was like for, I would say like 05, 06, even like stretching it out. I mean, he was riddled with a lot of like missed time due to injuries, but in particular in 05, like this guy was a major star in, it's a rebuilding period for WWE, but their stabilizing year is 2005. And historically, a lot of that is assigned to John Cena, but it's like Batista was the A name of that duo, and it was Cena number 2. Now that flips over time, but like Dave Bautista, I think like that Mania in 2005 is one of the great promotional builds in that company's history, that we do have a pay-per-view number that showed an incredible number that him and Hunter drew, that I think both of them deserve that credit for. The question is going to be the longevity side of it, that he gets in very late and, the career ends in 2010, has a totally forgettable comeback in 2014, and another rather forgettable return in 2019 for the retirement match for Triple H. But I'm at least interested to dive more into Dave Bautista. Not saying I would be voting for him, but at least looking into it a bit more. Joe is just the other one I wanted to touch upon, because he's like, I see him as, I imagine Moxley gets more support than Joe this year. Joe is just, there are several comparison points to Gunther, not like a like-for-like comparison, but I think you can make a lot of the same arguments of somebody that was so key in the development of Ring of Honor, that, TNA, he had, I would say certainly the X Division run was a big deal. His run in the heavyweight division, less so. But definitely like this AEW run, it's been a very good run. I think it's going to be looking at largely a work-based candidate with some exceptions, and one that has just the longevity of it as well, where he's basically been a major star, a big star in every company that he has gone to. WWE on the main roster, like he had a pretty impressive program with Brock Lesnar. It just wasn't really explored that much deeper. And he's certainly considered in that, that grouping in AEW of a star that is going to be protected and always in a solid role. And at times that they will put the championship on as well. He's sort of in that role of when, in case of emergency, we have a John Moxley or a Samoa Joe to lean on. So Joe is someone that I will certainly consider this year too.
So, obviously you said you're voting for Briscoes and Moxley. You're sort of thinking about Joe and Batista, and sounds like kind of Lynch as well, but sort of leaning away. I'm in the same boat with Becky Lynch as well. I think if I recall correctly, I voted for Becky last year, but it's the same sort of thing. And I talked about it in my audio I did last year as well, that, I'm gonna vote for Becky, but as the years go on, it's just sort of like the farther we get away from that moment, it is just the sort of thing of it's starting to feel more like a blip, where I should say a massive blip, like a massive moment in women's wrestling and WWE wrestling as well, history. But it is like the farther we get from it, it was a year, it was a year and a half or something. The farther we get from it, especially just continuously going back to the heel work, it's like the big issue was a babyface. Why not? Why don't we go back to this? So I'm sort of in the same agreement, but it sounds like if you're thinking of three other people, Samoa Joe, Dave, maybe Lynch, but it sounds like you're sort of waning off.
Yeah, I like looking at this. I doubt I will max out my ballot in this category. Briscoes and Moxley will be votes for sure. I would put them, in that order, probably Joe. Becky and Batista, I'll take looks at. I can't imagine I'd be voting for others here. I've never voted.
You said you were a Trish voter, right?
No, it's not. Despite my Toronto citizenship here.
Oh, I assumed.
Yes. Mercedes is a candidate. I think, she has done very well since leaving WWE. I don't think she's going to get that Hall of Fame level support at this point. There's a lot of like wide range of candidates here.
It's also a little bit of an open season, a little bit.
It is.
Looking at the Briscoes, they're the leaders of the clubhouse right now. 48.8% is what they got last year. So there is, with three people, Sabu, Cody, and Punk going in last year, there is a sort of little bit of this open season of like, there are a lot of votes up for grabs from a lot of people. Where are those votes going to land? You also have four people coming in: Batista, Kane, Booker T, and Gunther, and all of them are also WWE guys. So it's looking at those like Punk and Cody voters, maybe those people might wane towards what we talked about. There is a WWE slant to a lot of these sort of things. Are those voters going to go and say, yeah, I'm a Kane voter for sure, or is it going to go all, let's say, like the Hardys or something? They had a big bump last year as well. It's sort of like there are a lot of votes to me up for grabs. It's sort of how is it all going to play out?
Yeah, I would imagine like last year, like there were a lot of votes. Like I've been a Punk voter for many years. Cody, I voted, I believe, the last two, and I voted for Sabu last year, which was the first year I voted for Sabu as well. I could certainly see like there's definitely candidates here that could get surprising bumps, and I would think a lot of those open votes, Ryan, could end on like the Steiners or the Hardys. I could certainly see them getting those, benefiting from the ballot opening up with three candidates going in last year.
Yeah, I currently, as it stands, I'm not sort of seeing anyone from Modern US and Canada maybe going in this year. Maybe one person, but I'm not necessarily like. I mean, it's such open season that I'm like, I don't know. I don't know.
A lot of pressure on Adam Berger to make this case for maybe Kane is just. I mean, look at this crossover politician, the Kill Tony WrestleMania appearance where he offended many.
Hit. We can all agree, a big old hit.
Yes. The only masked wrestler that is so anti-mask to come out of, like, this would be like if El Santo was like an anti-vaxxer. But I await the argument. I cannot imagine I'll be voting for Kane. I'll put my cards on the table, but hey, open-mindedness. That's what Ryan encourages on this show.
I try my best, and even then, sometimes I'll come and be like, "Hey, my mind's closed, buddy. I don't know, Booker T. I don't know, buddy. I can't. Let's see if there's anything here."
Let me say this in my about Kane. I will say this: this was years and years ago when he was in WWE, and I was working at a television station, and they brought him in for an interview, and I did this interview with him, and I'm recording this mic with my microphone, and maybe you can appreciate this, Ryan. I notice in the final minutes my battery has died, and the whole interview is gone. It's like 15 minutes gone, and I run to him and the WWE PR person at the elevator, and I just explain my battery died, and he just goes, "Well, let's just do it again." And he sat down, redid the interview with him. I will always have an appreciation for the fact that the man sat down and redid an interview, which I at least humored him by changing up all the questions for the second interview. So that is my positive contribution to the Kane case.
Well, I appreciate that. That's a good story for Kane, and legitimately you saying that you're looking at your battery and it's almost dead chills up my spine. The amount of times, both in audio recording and also film in college and whatnot. Chills up the spine of bad days for sure. John, thank you so much for coming onto the ballot. It has been a extreme pleasure to chat with you and discuss both Gunther, both Ted Turner, but also the modern US-Canada region as well. I'm very thankful for you being here. It was tremendous talking to you. I'll open the door like any podcast would. Do you got any plugs or anything that you want to guide people to?
Only that if you want to check out more of my work and you weren't tired of my voice after this hour and 40 minutes, you can check out everything over at postwrestling.com, where our crew includes Wei Ting, Brandon Thurston, John Kleinchester, Neil Flanagan, Jack Wannen. We put out shows multiple times per week. And if you want to support us, our Patreon is postwrestlingcafe.com. We do a bunch of bonus shows. Just wrapped up a series covering the Hulk Hogan Real American series. And that's where I do all of my work. And Ryan, I just wanted to thank you for inviting me. I found the show a couple of months ago, and I've listened to most of the episodes and have found them super enlightening. I love the concept and really giving me an excuse to do a real deep dive here into Gunther. So this was a lot of fun. I enjoyed doing the show. So thank you for inviting me.
Of course. Anytime you're happy to come back on, I would love to have you back on. And again, I also want to say, this is a compliment off. Another compliment. I just want to thank what you and Post and Brandon Thurston have been doing regarding a lot of the lawsuits regarding WWE. The Janelle Grant stuff, the Ring Boy lawsuit. I find that incredibly important and truly extremely valuable for everyone. I just appreciate that there are people doing that and covering that in such a real way, because it is such, these are such tragedies. I guess you could say alleged tragedies for legal reasons, but tragedies that it is such important that they are covered with grace. And I find that what you and Brandon and when Post have done with those sort of topics have been so incredibly valuable and important. And it really moves me of how important that you guys are bringing those stories and keeping it in the mindset of everyone as they consume professional wrestling.
I appreciate it a lot, Ryan. Like we've got a really great team with us, and working as closely as I do with like Brandon, like he's just an outstanding reporter. So yeah, these are stories that we've been trying to cover as best we can and present it in as easy a form as possible for people to understand, because these are really significant stories that hopefully we're able to shine a bit of a light on for people to keep up to date with, even though some of the details are pretty disturbing.
Yeah, and obviously a great way to end a podcast, but to bring all that stuff up again. But I wanted to bring it up because it is important to me personally. John, again, thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for coming onto the ballot. Thank you, everybody, for listening at home, wherever you are in the car, listening to this episode. I already said it. Next episode, it'll probably be coming out sooner than a month. I believe in 2 weeks or so will be that Kane episode with Adam Berger, where he presents his his oral argument for Glenn Jacobs himself.
Will See No Evil's DVD sales be the difference maker?
I mean, genuinely, John, I'm gonna look into it and see if there's anything there.
You got to.
I hate to say it. I'm
theatrical release of See No Evil, folks.
Not many movies of WB Studios got theatrical releases, so there's something there. Maybe was it the movie that killed it? I don't know. I got to do some investigation. I hate to say it, but I'm probably watching See No Evil in the next 2 weeks or so.
Yes. Do you remember what the original name was? The working title for that movie before See No Evil? EYE. I Scream Man.
Was that the production title or the working title?
Oh, that was the title of the movie they were going to go with, and then they changed it to See No Evil. I guess more. They really wanted to market to people knowing exactly what they were signing up for. Ice Cream Man.
Awful. It also doesn't make any sense. Isn't he like a butcher or something in the movie? He's not even like an ice cream parlor guy. What? Oh, God, there's so much to do with Kane next time, but stay tuned for that, I guess, folks. What a sell. Stay tuned for that next time on The Ballot. Thank you everybody for listening. We'll talk to you next time. Have a good one. Bye. The Ballot podcast was recorded and produced by myself, Ryan Knightsey, as part of the Voices of Wrestling podcast network. Please rate, subscribe, and most importantly, review the show wherever podcasts are found. To continue the conversation, please leave us a message at 9495-BALLOT or 949-522-5568. You could also join the VOW Discord and join us in the Ballot channel. Have a good day, and we'll talk to you next time on The Ballot.
Hi, I'm Case Lowe, co-host of the Open the Voice Gate podcast. The one question I'm constantly asked when it comes to Dragon Gate is how do I get into the promotion? Well, stop asking and start listening to the Open the Voice Gate podcast, released every Wednesday on the Voices of Wrestling podcasting network. For exclusive news and show reviews, look no further than the leader in Dragon Gate coverage, Open the Voice Gate.